a lot of people aren't familiar with this tort. You guys, in our justice system, we have two types of law. We have criminal law and we have civil law. Okay, and so criminal law is obviously something like there's a law against doing something, you violate it, and there are consequences for your actions for violating them. Civil law tends to be more like lawsuits when you or I sue each other. Okay, and so when we talk about tort, we're basically talking about civil law where people are suing another person. Okay, and this topic has been something that's been discussed a lot in recent years is medical malpractice lawsuits. Okay, so this is one of the drivers of higher healthcare costs. Okay, because doctors, hospitals, nurses, from time to time will get sued by patients. Okay, for malpractice, for neglect, or for what's the word I'm looking for? Making mistakes. Okay, so these lawsuits can be really expensive. Okay, so doctors and hospitals, they have insurance like you do for your car, right? So if you get in an accident and it's your fault, they don't come after your mom and dad's house. Okay, the insurance company covers the damages. That's why you have it. Okay, so doctors and hospitals have to have this as well. That insurance is very expensive because these lawsuits sometimes, well, let me just give you an example. Okay, give you some hypotheticals. Okay, you go in for surgery, something's wrong with your stomach, and they go in, we're going to have to go and look at your stomach. Okay, so they open you up, they're digging around in there, checking you out, cleaning you up, and then they close you back up. But they forgot something inside your stomach, like a sponge or something like that. Okay, so over the next few weeks, you're having this excruciating pain in your stomach, and you're like, Doc, something's wrong. This is worse than it was. They bring you back in, open you back up. Oops. Now there's an infection. You spend 2 weeks in the hospital because of this infection. You're going to sue the hospital or you're going to sue the doctor, right? There's a lot of pain and suffering. You've missed work, okay? There's medical bills, all this stuff. So how much are you going to sue them for? I mean, come on, this was like excruciating. And you had to have 2 surgeries instead of 1.
Everything.
What do you mean? You want the whole hospital?
Cover your entire medical bill.
Okay, just to cover, what about pain and suffering? We're going to give you something for that? All that pain and suffering you went through? Now, if you get this in front of a jury, okay, and a jury is juries tend to be sympathetic to victims, okay? So you're asking for $2 million. This was a big screw up by the hospital. We want to make sure this doesn't happen again. You know what I mean? So they want to punish them. So $2 million, pain and suffering, okay? And then all the medical bills covered, and lost pay from work, lost wages. What if you lost your job? That sort of thing, right? Okay, so let me go a little harsher here, okay? You go, let's say you're in your 60s, you have diabetes, and, with diabetes, sometimes you lose circulation to your extremities, like your feet. And this person is really stagnant, and they stand up, and there's nothing in their leg, there's nothing in their foot. They go in, and the doc says, basically your right foot is dead. I mean, we're going to have to amputate. So you go in to get your right foot cut off, and they accidentally cut off your left foot. Now you have no feet. How much? You might be able to get prosthetics for both feet. I don't know if you'll ever walk again. You're going to have to refit your house for like a wheelchair. How much? Somebody throw a number out there. $5 million. That sounds about right. Okay? $5 million. Now, what usually happens, guys, is the insurance company that represents the doctors and hospitals wants to settle this case. They do not want this to go in front of a jury. Okay, so they're saying, okay, look, we'll offer you $2 million. Will you take it? You're like, no, I want $5 million. All right, how about 3? Okay, they'll try and settle this. So most of these are settled, okay, because the insurance know if you go to trial, you're probably gonna get that $5 million, okay? Because this is awful, what happened to this person, right? Now, if you've ever had surgery, my son has had surgery on his hands before. And I tell you what, they are super careful. They write on the side that's not getting the surgery, they write no in marker on the arm. You know what I mean? So they don't make that mistake, because that has happened before. Okay? So if they get a $5 million settlement, what's going to happen to the insurance? You know, the premium that the doctors and hospitals, are they going to have to pay more for insurance if you get these big settlements? Yeah, just like if you've had 4 accidents by the time you're 20 years old driving, what's happening to your insurance rate? Yeah, same thing happens with doctors and hospitals. So because their insurance goes up, they have to charge more for their health care. Follow me? So some people think we should put caps on how much award could be awarded to a victim here. And if you can put a cap on it, like say we're going to cap, damages at $1 million for pain and suffering. Okay, now some states have these caps, others don't. All right. My in-laws used to live in West Virginia, and West Virginia didn't have any caps. And the insurance was so expensive for the doctors in West Virginia that the doctors were leaving the state. So they didn't have enough doctors. Okay, because it was too expensive to get insurance. You couldn't make a living. And then you have the scenario of wrongful death. So somebody goes in for, a routine surgery, and they're administered the wrong drug or something like that, and the patient dies. Can you put a price tag on somebody's life? Well, no, you can't really do that. But if you could put a cap on wrongful death lawsuits, then insurance companies would know this is the worst case scenario. And based on statistics, this is roughly how many mistakes happen a year. Okay, the insurance companies can plan for that, and this will help bring insurance premiums under control. Okay, this is just one other way to try and bring down healthcare costs in this country because they're way high. Okay, now if you think there's some room here that we should have some caps for pain and suffering, how much pain and suffering can you give? Okay, I think the number in Kansas is actually about 250,000, the most you can get for pain and suffering. Okay. For other things like that, if it goes in front of a jury, there's not necessarily a cap. Okay, so how do you feel about that? You think that if you think it's a good idea to maybe try and put some caps on to bring health insurance under control, or every case is going to be different? You're like, you know what? We need to leave the door open. Of course, this isn't going to allow insurance companies to plan very well if you leave the door open for major lawsuits. Okay. So you decide on that. Okay. All right. Let me talk to you guys a little bit about oil. And this is in the news a lot recently because of some executive orders that President Biden has signed. By the way, this is a government class. In the first 3 days in his presidency, Biden signed more executive orders than any other president. Okay, he's up to like 20 executive orders now within the first week. Okay, now all presidents use executive orders. Bush didn't do any in the first 3 days. Okay, but there was a litany of things. One of them is, well, a couple of them deal with oil and energy. Okay, and you guys heard of the Keystone Pipeline? Okay, so the Keystone Pipeline runs from Canada, or it was going to. It was going to run from Canada. Up here, guys, there's a bunch of what are called oil sands. Okay, in the ground, there's oil and it's kind of mixed with sand, all right? So right now, what you have to do with that to make it usable oil, you have to refine it. Okay, you guys know what a refinery is, right? So you take oil and you make gas, you make jet fuel, you make kerosene, you make different types of fuels out of that oil, okay? So right now they transport all that by rail on trains, okay? What they want to do is build a pipeline that would come down through North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, and down to basically the Gulf of Mexico, where we have a lot of oil refineries, okay, where we turn that oil into gas, okay? Under President Obama, they said, we're not going to do this pipeline. Trump came in, he said, we're going to do the pipeline. Biden said, we're not doing the pipeline. So that's off, okay? Now, for the first time in American history, about 2 years ago, the United States became energy independent, meaning that we produced enough oil in the United States so that we don't need oil from anybody else for the first time ever. Okay, now, oil is traded as a worldwide commodity. So we do sell oil overseas and we buy oil from overseas, even though we have enough of our own. It's just logistically, it makes sense for some of our oil from Alaska to go to Japan, to the Far East. It makes sense for some of our oil on the East Coast to go to Europe. Okay. In fact, we really want to keep those trading with those countries so they're not dependent. So like Europe's not dependent on Russia for oil. We don't want them to be dependent on Russia. And we don't want to be dependent on the Middle East. Okay, we've had 3 wars there since 1999, or since 1990. We have 3 wars in the Middle East. And I know oil wasn't always the reason, but it was part of the reason. That was oil security. Guys, if we don't have energy, we don't have an economy. Now, the thing that made us most self-sufficient is a new type of way to get oil out of the ground. And that's called fracking. How many of you guys never heard, how many of you guys don't know when I say fracking, what that is? Come on, raise your hands. You know what fracking is? You know what fracking is? You guys are smart. You know what fracking is? Okay, there's rock in the ground, right? It's called shale, rock, okay? And in that rock, which is in different parts of the United States under our feet, not here, but in Oklahoma there is, and North Dakota there's a bunch. You go to Colorado, almost the whole freaking place, okay? We have so much oil shale under the ground, so you got to drill into that rock. And then you send high pressure water and chemicals in there. It breaks up the rock underground and then removes the oil, and you suck it out of the ground. Okay? There's hundreds of years of supply of oil under our feet. Now, how many of you guys have felt an earthquake? Okay? And those are mostly originating out of Oklahoma, although we've had some in East Wichita recently. We're not doing any fracking in East Wichita. Okay, but we've had some. So some people blame fracking for the earthquakes. Okay, fortunately, none of these have been really bad or anything. You know what I mean at this point. But you guys have seen gas prices the last couple of years, right? All right, they're down. Okay, because there's so much supply of oil worldwide. Okay. When it used to be like if there was a conflict in Nigeria, which is a big oil producing country, it affects the price of oil worldwide. You understand? If there's a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico, where we have those oil refineries down there along Galveston and down, in Louisiana and so forth. If there's a hurricane coming towards these refineries, the price of oil goes up, even before the hurricane hits, because they're worried there's going to be a cut in supply. So the futures prices, it starts going up. Does that make sense? Okay. So what we want to make sure, I think, is a good idea is that we don't have to rely on Middle East oil. We can still buy it from them, but we don't have to. You know what I mean? That's energy security. That's part of national security. Okay. Now, the other thing that President Biden signed executive order was, in Alaska, we have something called ANWR, the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge. Okay. Now, we already drill for oil in Alaska. Okay. We've been doing that for 60 years. And we have a pipeline that runs from Alaska down into the continental U.S. Okay. But there's been a lot of oil discovered at this National Wildlife Refuge. Today, we have the ability to drill, instead of drilling straight down, we can have a footprint right here. And we can drill over there, we can drill over there, we can drill over there, we can drill over there from one spot. Okay? We have better technology. So if you were to drill for oil in this Alaska National Wildlife Refuge, which has a bunch of caribou and different, wildlife and so forth, they want to kind of keep it, pristine, which is fine. But the footprint would be very small. You know what I mean? So you don't have to have an oil drill here, 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 because you can do that, that, that. You follow me? Now, President Trump signed an executive order saying that we will open up drilling in ANWR. President Biden just reversed that. Okay, so he also put a halt on any new fracking permits on federal lands. This is the president can sign executive orders over federal lands, which ANWR in Alaska is federal lands. Okay, and then off the Gulf Coast of the United States, okay, there is a ton of oil. Now, do you guys remember studying or learning about the BP oil spill, Deepwater Horizon out in the Gulf of Mexico? This was a few years ago. There's a good movie with Mark Wahlberg in it, Deepwater Horizon. Okay. We were drilling way out here at BP. British Petroleum was drilling way out here in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. It's really deep. You understand? Because law does not permit to drill off the coast of Florida, the Atlantic coast. Okay, now there is drilling off the coast of Texas and Louisiana. Okay, but there's a lot of oil off the coast of Florida. Now, any of you guys ever been to the beach in Florida? Where'd you guys go? Watercolor?
Yeah, it's like 30 minutes away from them.
Destin. Okay, yeah. All right. So off the coast of Destin, if you're on the beach and you look out, do you want to see an oil platform like a mile off? What about 3 miles? It was 3 miles off and looked about that big where you're sitting. Now, with Deepwater Horizon, what happened was the casing where the pipes go into the seabed, that broke. And so oil was just pumping out. Because it was so deep, that's why they had a hard time shutting it off. You know what I mean? If you were closer to the shore, it wouldn't be as deep. But if there was a leak or something went wrong, it would be closer to the beach. You know what I mean? So that stuff, that oil would get there quicker. Okay, when we had Deepwater Horizon, because I grew up down there, near Destin, Pensacola, okay, you did see some remnants of that reaching the beaches. Okay, Mother Nature's pretty good about recovering. You know what I mean? The worst oil disaster we ever had, guys, was the Exxon Valdez in the 1980s. And this was a big tanker ship filled with oil in the Alaska, up here in Alaska. And the captain of the ship was drunk. And he ran aground. And it broke a hole in the ship. And it just started spewing out all this oil. It was devastating to the wildlife. Birds, fish, I mean, seals, all kinds, just covered in oil. It was horrible. Okay? So we don't want to see that kind of stuff. I mean, that stuff's ugly, you know what I mean? But we want to make sure we have enough energy here, because guys, back in the 1970s, OPEC, which is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, put an embargo on the United States, and they wouldn't sell us oil. We had an energy crisis in the United States in 1976. It was horrible. Gas prices went up. We didn't have enough gas. You go to get gas, they're out of gasoline, okay? And prices went way up. And so we're in pretty good shape now. Now, if President Biden said he's not going to do away with fracking, but if he says, you know, if he changes his mind and they pass a law saying no more fracking in this country, all of a sudden we are now dependent again on foreign oil. Okay? We have these resources up here, along here. Now, do you feel like we should, you know, maybe open those up just in case? Or, hey, if we need to later, we'll do it. You know, most experts say drilling in the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge is not going to hurt. And the caribou, by the way, love the pipeline. The pipeline up there is above the ground, so it's up high. So wildlife can pass underneath it. But they like the pipeline because it's warm. Okay, so they hang out by the pipeline. Okay, so I don't know. You know a little bit more about how oil is, you know, works worldwide and so forth, and about energy security and so forth. So you guys can go ahead and answer that. Okay. And the last one is just more of an ideological question. Okay. The U.S. government is doing too much to help the American people. Okay. This our government, and I know you guys really haven't studied the Constitution, but just as you feel, are they going beyond the role? Is the government going beyond the role that they were given in the Constitution? Are they doing too much? Obviously, guys, if you want things like Medicare for all, okay, then you want the government to do more, not less. Okay? So this is kind of just an ideological question. Do you think the government's too big? Do they do too much? Or do they not do enough? Cool? All right, we got 24. Done, right? This is what I want you to do. I want you to add up your yeses and nos. Okay. So this is how we're going to do this. You do not have to participate if you don't want to, but it is kind of good for me to know, like, how my students' minds think, okay, so that I make sure that I'm covering everybody in the classroom and looking out for people and so forth, okay? So I'd like it if you participated. You don't have to, okay? So let's just start with this. Did any of you have 18 or more yeses? Okay, don't raise your hand again, because you already did, okay? Any of you have 15 or more yeses? Okay. Do we have any 15 or more no's? 18 or more no's? So, how many you had 10, 11, 12, 13, or 14 of each? There you are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh my gosh. Okay. All right. Of the 4 that had 18 or more yeses, anybody have 19? 20? Yeah, you got to watch out for this one right here. You guys that answered 18 or more yeses, okay, basically we're going to call you conservative. Okay? Conservative. All right? Now, that also would put you on the right wing of the political spectrum. Okay? Now, because you're conservative, you're generally going to be supporting the Republican Party. Okay? That's generally where you're going to find yourself. Although some of you may tend to be libertarian, which I'll talk about in a minute. Okay? Now, the 15 or more yeses, this is your mainstream Republican Party. Okay? And so if you look at this, between the conservatives and mainstream Republicans, you're looking at about 40% of the U.S. population. Okay? These people here are moderates. Okay? Now, if you had a couple more yeses than nos, okay? So say you had 14 yeses and 10 nos, you might lean a little bit towards the Republican. If you had 14 nos and 10 yeses, you may lean a little bit with the Democrats, okay? So these are the mainstream Democrat. Okay? And then 18 or more no's, guys, would be somebody that is liberal, progressive. And if you went like 19, 20, you're getting into socialists. Okay? You get to 1920 here, you tend to be what political scientists refer to as reactionary. Okay? Now, this, guys, is about 20% of the population. And this is about 40% of the population. Okay, we are a divided country as a nation. You guys know that, right? Okay. Now, these people in the middle, these moderates, like I said, some lean to the Democrats, some lean to the Republicans, some are just right in the middle. Okay. Did anybody have like 12 of each? Okay. All right. Because that's like right in the middle on the fence. Okay. All right. Moderates, yeah. Okay. There you have it. Okay. So if I draw the political spectrum, guys, okay, here's our 8 in the middle. These are the moderates. This is the fence. You're on the fence. Okay. All right. You go to the right wing, you get Republicans, conservatives, reactionary. And if you go all the way to the right, the far right, fascist. Okay? Now, you go to the left, you get your Democrats, right? Liberals. Liberal progressive, pretty close to the same. get your socialists, and you go all the way out to the left wing. Communists. Okay? So when you hear left and right, left wing, right wing, now you have a little bit better understanding, okay, of where you land, where you fall, okay? And you guys, you know, one fun thing to do is try this out on mom or dad. Okay, now you may have to try and explain some of this to them, or you can show them my videos, okay? But, yeah, so see if you fall kind of where mom and dad. I imagine you probably know where mom or dad are politically, just basically, we just had an election, so you kind of know what they were thinking, probably, okay? Did you fall with them, okay? Now, we can talk about different politicians here that kind of fit into these slots, names that you would know. Like, so President Trump, okay? Guys, President Trump is the first president we've ever had that had never held public office or was not a general. Like George Washington never held public office. He was a general. Dwight Eisenhower never held public office. He was a general. What was the guy from the Civil War? Ulysses S. Grant. He was never elected anything until he was elected president. Trump's the only one that hasn't been either of those. Okay, so going into his presidency, he said certain things, but we didn't know, he didn't have a past to kind of judge off of politically. Okay, so what he ended up being was pretty conservative. Trump did. Okay, on most things. There were some things that he was pretty liberal on as well. Okay, so your conservative politicians that you look for, your big conservatives today. How many of you guys have ever heard of Ted Cruz? Okay, Ted Cruz is a senator from Texas. Okay, and he's a really like practical, principled conservative. Okay, he walks the walk, he talks the talk, and he backs it up. Okay, so if you're a conservative, you're looking for somebody that, hey, let me listen to somebody else that's conservative. Ted Cruz is probably a good person to look at. Your mainstream Republicans, I mean, you got guys like Mitt Romney. You may have heard of him. Jerry Moran, our senator, one of our senators from Kansas, is kind of a mainstream. Roger Marshall looks like he's going to be pretty conservative. Ron Estes, who represents the 4th District of Kansas, that represents us in the House, he's fairly conservative. So the Republican Party is divided a little bit between these two groups, okay? And the Democratic Party likewise. You guys all know Bernie Sanders, okay? And we know he is a socialist, okay? If I talk about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, okay? She's a progressive socialist. These are the far left of the Democratic Party. And then you do have some moderates. Okay, I mean, Nancy Pelosi is a mainstream Democrat, but she feels a lot of pressure from the left of her because there's a strong percentage of people down here, this 20%, or roughly 15 to 20% of Democrats that lean very hard left, put a lot of pressure on Nancy Pelosi, who's in the mainstream, believe it or not. Okay, so there's fighting within these parties to pull them to the wings. You understand? They, you know, because the conservatives tend to be more outspoken and the liberals tend to be more outspoken. Okay, and so they try and pull their parties this direction. But to win an election, you got to win these people. You know what I mean? So during general elections, you tend to see the parties move to the middle to get these voters. Okay? This is where most Americans are. Now, generally, this country has been a center-right country, a little bit more conservative than liberal. Now, the millennials generation are pretty far over here. I don't know what you guys are what. Why? what do you guys, Generation Z? Z? I don't know where you're at. We really haven't seen this yet. Okay? Whether your generation's going to follow like the millennials and be like way out here. Okay? So, there's another way to do this, guys. Okay? And that really makes more sense than the wings. Okay? And that is to do this political spectrum left and right as a circle. So, if I draw a big circle here, okay, there they are on the fence. There's your moderates. Okay, right there. All right, you go right, you get Republicans. You go left, you get Democrats, right? You go further right, you get conservatives. You go further right, you get liberals, right? Now, down here, fascism and communism share a lot in common. Now, you guys all had history, so you learned about Hitler and you learned about Stalin. Hitler was a fascist. Stalin was a communist. Okay? So you got your fascists and your communists down here. And they share a lot in common. Generally, what they share in common Aryan totalitarianism. Okay, where there's a willingness to violate the law to get what they want. Willingness to violate the constitutions of those countries, the rule of law to get what they want. Both fascists and communists tend to do that. Okay, they share a lot in common. Okay, and as I've studied fascism a lot, guys, okay, because it drives me crazy when people call other people fascists without knowing what fascism is and understanding. Okay, both are about control. Communism and fascism are both about control and power. Okay, and with fascists, you're allowed to have private property. You're allowed to own your own business, but the government's going to run that or tell you how to run it. Okay, they're going to control industry, the fascists. Under communism, you're not allowed to own property. So the government owns everything. Or everything is shared equally by everyone. It never works out that way. So the government runs it. Okay, and there's no private property. All right, so fascism doesn't necessarily only come from the right. Okay, communism does. I mean, it's a left-wing ideology. Okay, so this is a better way. Actually, this is a more simple way to understand left and right. This is a better way. Okay, now let's talk about libertarianism. The Libertarian Party, which has been around since the 1970s, has had presidential candidates in every election since the 1970s. The third party. And the root of the word is liberty. Libertarian, liberty. Okay, which means what? Freedom. Okay, so of all those 24 issues I gave, there's really 3 areas that you can look at this. These are pocketbook issues, bedroom issues, and war and peace. Or otherwise put hawk or dove. Right? Dove means peace. The hawk is a predator. Yes? Okay. Now, when we do this, looking at the different parties, okay? Okay, so pocketbook issues would mean things like taxes, right? Things like Green New Deal is kind of a pocketbook issue. The Medicare is a pocketbook. It's expensive. Taxes, welfare, those are pocketbook issues. Okay. Republicans tend to want smaller government, smaller taxes. So they will pass laws to try and, or actually pass, they want you to be able to keep your money. Okay, they want less government. So they don't really try and act in this area very much. Democrats, they want your money because they want to take your money and do good things with it. Does that make sense? They want to create programs to help the needy, Medicare for all. So they do laws like this. They like that. Okay, they want your money. Now, when it comes to bedroom issues, I'm talking about abortion. I'm talking about gay marriage. Okay, talking about things like trying 14-year-olds as adults. This is kind of a social issue. Social issues. Okay, Republicans. They like to pass laws that promote family values. So like using the tax code to encourage marriage, that sort of thing. Okay, so they want to pass laws that impact that. Okay, Democrats tend to be more socially liberal where they're like, hey, it's your body, do what you want with it. Okay, it's not the government's role. So abortion, on demand for many, okay? Gay marriage, that's up to you. What you do in your own bedroom doesn't matter to us, okay? And then war and peace. Okay, now, President Trump made a concerted effort to get our troops out of most of the places they were at. Like in Afghanistan, tried to draw down there, never got to completely do it. Pulled our troops out of Syria, just try to limit, okay, these long wars that he talked about, okay? But Republicans also tend to be pretty hawkish, okay? If you look at history, World War I, Democratic president. World War II, Democratic president. Vietnam, Democratic president. Korea, Democratic president. Then you go to the Gulf War in 1989-90, Republican president. You go to Afghanistan, Republican president. Iraq War, Republican president. Okay? Long time ago, the Republicans used to be an isolationist party, don't get involved in other people's business overseas. That changed, especially after 9/11. Okay? So when it comes to war and peace, and Democrats, you have different ones. Okay? So like Hillary Clinton, she's kind of a hawk. Not really sure where Joe Biden is. Okay, a lot's going to depend with Joe. Who is he listening to in his cabinet? Okay, who's driving them? Okay, so right here, it's kind of a wash. Republicans tend to be a little more hawkish, and Democrats tend to be a little more hawkish, and Democrats a little more dovish. But it depends on the person. Okay? Let's go over here to libertarian. Small government. Freedom. Economic freedom. Low taxes. Low regulations. The government should have an army, a navy, for defensive purposes. You go to the Constitution and you look at what powers it gives the Congress, it only does that. The government only does what powers it's given in the Constitution. Economic freedom. When it comes to the bedroom, freedom. The government shouldn't decide what you do with your body, what you put in your body, so libertarians tend to be for legalization of pot, maybe other drugs. I have met pro-life libertarians. Most of them are not, because they don't want the government telling you what to do. Period. It's my life. I'm a free person. Get away from me. Get away from my pocketbook. Get away from my bedroom. Get away from me. And when it comes to war and peace issues, most libertarians tend to be very isolationist. You guys remember when you were studying the build up to World War II? The United States did not want to get in the war. Okay, and it took something major like Pearl Harbor to bring us into the war. I mean, guys, all of our friends in Europe were being murdered by the Nazis. Okay, these libertarians don't get involved over there. Okay, it's not our business. Okay, so this is about freedom. And then you have the two parties on these two different issues. So if you tend to see yourself kind of in this area, and a lot of young people tend to be kind of libertarian. Okay, so that's a different way of looking at how the parties are divided. Okay, so if you're a big abortion voter, like that's the key thing you're voting on, then you're going to vote generally with the Republican Party. It's a social issue. Okay, if you're like taxes are way too high, you're going to go to the Republicans. If you feel like government needs to do more and help people with rich people's money or middle class money, then you're going to be towards the Democrats. And if you're, the Republican Party today on things like homosexuality has come a long way. Okay, so the parties are changing. Really, they are changing before our eyes, which I'll talk a little bit more about next session. Okay. Hey, on Friday, I'm going to have a sub. He's going to hand out your books, and I'm going to give you an assignment in class, okay, because I'm not going to be here. Cool? So help Mr. Holman with handing out the books, please. Thank you. Have a great day. Thank you. See you guys next week, I guess.
Have a good one, Mr. Brett.
Thank you.